something to lean on. And I'm short-sighted. Senator Foy, Consul Ho, friends, Zhongguo Pengwimen, Wansanghao. I'm deeply honored to be invited to deliver the inaugural lecture for the Asia Heritage Month at York University. My topic, as Senator Foy has said, is When China Stood Up, the experience of my father, James Endicott. This reminds me of a comment by Mark Twain who said, when he was 7 years old, he thought his father knew everything. When he was 17, he thought his father knew nothing. When he was 25, he was surprised how much the old man had learned in the meantime. I belong to the third group, which helps to explain the respect with which I hold my father and his contribution to the public life of Canada and of China. Now, to set the stage for what is following this evening, I propose to start by reminding ourselves of a time when China was humiliated. The modern history of their country, according to the Chinese, and according to the way we have learned it, begins about 160 years ago with the events of the Opium Wars and the treaties which brought them to an end. Although the Treaty of Nanking, signed on the deck of a British warship in the Yangtze River, promised peace and friendship between China and Britain and, quote, full security and protection for their persons and properties within the dominions of the other. It also ceded the island of Hong Kong to Britain in perpetuity, to be ruled by Queen Victoria and her successors, quote, as they see fit. It opened up a number of other cities, including Shanghai, to British subjects and their families to reside in. And it ordered the Chinese to pay $21 million indemnity for the value of the opium, the British opium, which they had destroyed, and for the total costs of the recent war. And with evident British punctiliousness, it stipulated, the treaty stipulated, that in the case of late payment, 5% interest would be charged, would be added. Very soon, a host of other Western powers, including especially the United States and France, pressured the weakened Chinese government to sign additional treaties, making more damaging concessions to Chinese sovereignty. And by the end of the 19th century, after further wars, treaties, and protocols, a full-blown unequal treaty system had emerged that turned China into a semi-colony with a vast superstructure of foreign privileges. Under a most favored nation clause, any concession granted to one applied to all. Foreign warships could patrol China's coastal and inland waters at will, and numerous treaty ports allowed for the stationing of foreign military units in different parts of the country. Might was right. Extraterritorial courts permitted foreign nationals to escape the jurisdiction of Chinese laws in favor of the laws of their own countries. Included in the treaties was a tariff system whereby China bound herself not to levy more than 5% customs duty and an inland revenue tax of 2.5%. Apart from the fact that this was a very low customs duty, permitting easy foreign penetration of the Chinese marketplace, there grew up a foreign-staffed customs service headed by a British Inspector General to collect and administer the revenue, and it provided many opportunities to meddle and pry into China's internal affairs. The British-owned Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, known today simply as HSBC, and its associated companies became fabulously wealthy on the opium and other trade. While China undoubtedly received benefits from the transfer of foreign ideas and technology, as many Western writers have been quick to point out, The unequal treaty system in which that transfer took place rankled grievously in the hearts and minds of growing numbers of young Chinese. Through the breach in China's defenses created by the treaties, there poured into China thousands of missionaries from North America and from Europe. Although most of them were well-intentioned, high-minded people, they were nilly-willy, tainted with the brush of imperialism that had forced the Chinese government to provide them with land for the construction of hospitals, schools, orphanages, residences, cemeteries, a process that would often lead to disputes with local populations and authorities. The Roman Catholic Church obtained an unprecedented concession whereby its bishops had the same rights and powers as Chinese magistrates in settling disputes involving Chinese Christian converts. The debate over how to evaluate the role of foreigners who came with good intentions and imperialist assumptions continues to percolate in China even to the present day. My son-in-law and I had just returned from Beijing and the opening of an exhibition, the Old Photo Exhibition, celebrating the 60 years in which 300 Canadian missionaries worked in Sichuan. And the discussions that came from that shows that the issue of how to evaluate their contribution in the context of imperialism is still a sensitive issue. The Methodist Church of China established a particularly large and vibrant mission field in the far western province of Sichuan in the 1890s. And into this project, the Endicotts came 115 years ago. While I was in Chongqing recently, Jiaotong University there invited me to address its students on the topic, the Endicotts and China. It is parts of that talk that I propose to share with you this evening. A young farm laborer from Devonshire, England, who had migrated to Ontario to become a house painter, and who met and eventually married a young woman who had fled Ireland with her parents during the potato famine of 1848. This was the unlikely beginning for a missionary vocation in China. But during a lengthy courtship, my grandfather studied hard, raised himself into the educated middle class by graduating with a gold medal in philosophy from Wesley College in Winnipeg. And then, backed by that community, he sailed to China with his wife in 1893 to, in their own words, help save the great millions dying in darkness. Steeped in the stories of G.A. Henty, Rudyard Kipling, the glories of the British Empire, the Endicotts settled first in the little city of Jiating, presently called Lausanne, in Sichuan, at the confluence of the Min and the Dabu rivers. On one occasion, there, my grandfather helped to pilot a British gunboat up the shallow waters of the Min River on a naval mission to enforce the treaty rights of the Roman Catholic Church. For 17 years, the Endicotts carried on their preaching and teaching work, creating a press to print Bibles, raised a family of 5 children before returning to Canada in 1910. Soon after that, their eldest son, James Gareth Endicott, decided he wished to follow his parents' footsteps and return to China as a missionary. After service in the Canadian Army during the Great War and graduation from the University of Toronto, he and his bride, Mary Austin, left for China in 1925 and, as Senator Toy has pointed out, settled in the city of Chongqing. By this time, it turned out that the millions of China were not so much dying in darkness as they were beginning to engage in vast revolutionary projects. They had overthrown an emperor, had established a republic, and were now mobilizing to defeat the unequal treaty system of imperialism. Before he left the mission 22 years later, James Endicott, Jr. found himself a comrade in arms of those who wished to inaugurate a new social order guided by the philosophies of Marxism. How could such a thing happen? How did the Chinese Revolution become intelligible and understandable to a Christian missionary? It was to discuss this question that for almost 25 years, J.G. Endicott made an annual appearance at classes in modern history, Chinese modern history, here at York University. And it is this matter that becomes the central theme of Robert Fothergill's drama, Dragonfly, that you're going to hear later this evening. I remember my father's talks well, and since I have the notes he made for his presentation, I will share some of them with you as a means of introducing this drama. Endicott recalled two childhood experiences that left a strong imprint on his character. First was that he grew up without any race prejudice. I played with the children of our servants, he recalled, and grew up in the old feudal order in China where servants had an attitude of loyal family retainers. We were taught not to call them servants, but to call them people who help us. The old cook, Lao Yang, regarded himself as partly responsible for the moral education of the Endicott children, especially when he caught them stealing cookies from the kitchen. The second experience was the grounding he received in what was later known as the social gospel. At the daily family prayers and Bible reading, his father, who had a strong, resonant voice, would dramatize the struggles of Moses as against Pharaoh, or Daniel as against Nebuchadnezzar. God was always on the side of the poor and the oppressed, as against the rich. And the boy got the impression, quote, that God was a force in life which demanded justice and righteousness. Although Endicott retained these impressions as part of his life and character, how did it come about, he later wondered, that he had so much difficulty when he returned to China as a missionary in 1925? In part, he blamed his education. He went to the University of Toronto and was taught history by Oxford-trained dons about the French Revolution, the Cromwell Revolution, the American Revolution and Civil War. But he was taught in such a way that when he got out to China and saw a revolution brewing under his eyes, he did not know how to go about understanding. I was taught philosophy, he said, strictly idealistic, and Karl Marx was never mentioned. Although the challenge of the social gospel continued in his thinking, the thrust of the kind of education he received meant that he too, to some extent, was the product of a Christianity and a missionary movement which he said, quote, was almost exclusively a bourgeois capitalist institution in its value judgments, politics, and general outlook. When he got to China in 1925, the revolutionary pot was already beginning to boil, and the foreign-owned press was busy proving what every foreign capitalist wanted to hear, namely, that the movement in China was a foreign conspiracy directed from Moscow and had no roots in China. As Endicott read Time, Life, and Reader's Digest, he gained no comprehension of the realities of the struggle in China. In the news available to us, he recalled, there was a concentration of horror stories to prove that the revolution was just a senseless orgy of murder and pillage. It was in this atmosphere of ignorance and misinformation that the missionaries went about their business of saving souls, curing bodies in hospitals, educating largely the children of the landlords and the well-off business people. Endicott came to have deep feelings of frustration, ineffectiveness, and of being overwhelmed by a mass of poverty, general backwardness, and official corruption on a massive scale. Very little in my Canadian education, he told the students at York, had equipped me to deal with this situation.